Welcome to another morning roll call. This is the On the Blue Line podcast, and I am your host, Wayne Mulder, and I'm so happy to be back with you again. It has been 1 year since I released content. If you've been following on social media or if you've been following the blog at ontheblueline.com, you have seen a little bit of the why, but it's been a little bit of a crazy year. I stopped in August of last year due to a few things that were going on. Few questions I had with the insanity of what was going on in the world and what I wanted to do as far as the future of this podcast and some of the content that I wanted to put out. That pause led into some other issues and some other things that happened. I lost a friend, and then I ended up losing my father in November of last year. And then I ended up having some health struggles. So it was one thing after another after another. And you know what? We call that life. And I'm sure you listening and you watching and you who are following this podcast and the things that we put out, you can resonate with that as well because we all go through these things. And it's not a reason to stop what I'm doing. And so for that reason, I've decided to come back. Now is a good time. I actually, in a strange way, due to some of the medical issues and so forth, that allowed me to be out of work for a little while. Away from my real job, and that then gave me the opportunity to get ahead of this and relaunch and so forth. So a little bit of a blessing in disguise. So I thought for this first podcast, I would start with kind of a reintroduction to what is the On the Blue Line, what are we all about, and just go over a few things with you. If you've been listening for any length of time, watching for any length of time, please don't just turn it off. I think you'll get something out of this as well, and you'll hear a little bit of where we're at and some of the changes that have taken place. So who am I? Well, I'm Wayne Mulder, but I also have served, I've been about a decade in law enforcement. And I also am an instructor at a local law enforcement academy. I bring this up because I think that it's important for anyone listening to, I'm not an expert. I don't pretend to be an expert. I don't pretend to know it all. I don't pretend to be able to look at some of these cases and some of these news stories, and when we talk about them, to even, in some ways, not even be a subject matter expert, depending on what it is, because maybe it's a part of law enforcement that I've never worked in. And of course, there's always the portion that media seems to forget, which is whether or not we have all the facts or not. So I usually try to have a pretty open mind when it comes to different things that we discuss on here. However, what a decade of law enforcement does bring to the table and the opportunity to teach at the academy is exposure. It gives you an exposure to a lot of different things, depending on the agency you work for and the area that you work for. Over a period of 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, you've probably had the opportunity to hold a lot of different positions within that agency. In law enforcement, for those of you who are not aware, typically you start out as some sort of trainee, typically in an FTO program, a field training officer program. And then from trainee, you will, at some point, you'll be released on your own. Now, if you work for some large city agencies and so forth, maybe there's 2 officers to the vehicle and so forth. But in your more rural areas and a lot of the country, you're going to be a solo officer. And you'll do that for probably that first year. You'll still be on probation. And then after that, you'll be a solo officer for a length of time. Some places have master patrol officers and so forth, people that have been on patrol in that position for 10 plus years or longer. But then there is also those that decide they want to move on. So they move on to FTO and they themselves will become a field training officer and train new deputies or officers who are joining the profession. Or maybe they'll decide to go to corporal, or at some agencies, corporal and detective are the same level. Or they may decide to go an investigative route and just be a detective. And then from there, at some agencies, corporal is a supervisory position, and then at others, you actually promote to sergeant, and then from sergeant maybe to lieutenant, and then to captain. And having had the opportunity to work at a lot of different positions within the agency really gives me perspective. And that's what I hope to bring to this podcast, and I hope that's what you get out of it. So what is the On the Blue Line podcast all about? Well, it's about empowering law enforcement in their personal lives, and then educating the public on the realities of law enforcement. So how do we empower law enforcement? Well, it's really in the content that I'm putting out to you and the vision that I hope that it will become. So there's tools and resources available. One thing that we recently released that I want to make sure everyone is aware of is an ebook. Why Law Enforcement Makes You Cynical and What You Can Do About It. It's a small ebook. It's 30 pages plus or minus, depending which format you get it. You can actually get it for free right now. And I know that's one of those things people say free and there's some gotcha in there, and it's legitimately free. The only thing is you do have to enter an email address to get it. So if you go to ontheblueline.com, you'll see it multiple places on multiple pages. If you click that, enter your email, you can get it. Obviously, if you enter your email address, I will be able to send you further information in the future, never more than one email a week, when podcasts come out, when blogs release, and so forth. However, if you don't want to do that, enter your email, get the free book, and then unsubscribe from the mailing list. It's not complicated. What's most important to me is that you take a look and you get this book, because what it is it goes over my story a little bit, and it talks about 3 areas where I see, again, perspective, with law enforcement being cynical in this career after a period of time. And then it goes over 3 things that I did to kind of combat it. So it's not meant to go over everything. There's still a lot more to that can be said, a lot more to be discussed. And I will be presenting that in different formats in the future. But for now, that book is out there. You can, if you would rather not enter your email, it can be found on Amazon as an ebook, and you can download it to Kindle. I think it's like $3.99 if that's something that you'd prefer. So again, why law enforcement makes you cynical and what you can do about it. And of course, you can find it on the Blue Line. So that's one of the things that we put out. The interview podcast, most of those are an evergreen style format. So definitely, if you haven't listened to them, I suggest going back. And what I mean by evergreen is they're not specific to any period of time. It's something that's going to benefit you no matter when you come to it, whether you come to it now or 5 years from now. It is good to go back. And we have some from all different subject matters, from yoga to business to mental health, spirituality. But there's a bottom line of something actionable that can help law enforcement officers in their personal lives. And that's what the interview podcasts are all about. And then another resource is these morning roll calls. I've got some different ideas on how I want to keep formatting these and some long-term goals should miracles happen as to what exactly we're going to do with this. But it's all about actionable advice, but it's also looking at news stories and different things that affect law enforcement. And then, of course, there's the blog. That was something I was doing periodically in the beginning. My intention is to bring it back weekly, and for at least the next 6 weeks, they're already scheduled. So from the time you're listening to this, the next 6 weeks are already in the hopper. So it should be something that we should be able to maintain on a weekly basis. And it's on a variety of subjects. I go over some of the mass shooting events. I talk about Second Amendment. I talk about the history, just all sorts of different topics. But again, with the mindset of helping law enforcement, empowering them, but then also educating the public on the realities of law enforcement. One thing we notice, and we've all seen it, is when these incidents happen, when bad things happen, when things get reported in the news, there's this reality and this disconnect from reality that happens. And a lot of times it ends up becoming more of a mob rule situation where the mob is pretty much running the narrative, putting this information out. And a lot of times you talk about misinformation, the very people who keep creating misinformation organizations within their groups are the very ones putting it out. So that's part of it too, is to push out the reality of it, talk about some news stories. The positive police news section, I like talking about good things that are happening and good things that law enforcement has done. And in discussion of specific scenes, police responses, and so forth. So the material you're going to find wide range of history, current events, social issues, religion, even politics. And why, you may be asking, why do we have to talk about those things? Those are all divisive subjects, especially this day and age. Because these things all affect law enforcement. And that is kind of the topic of today's discussion. A little bit of what is coming, but then also this underlying mantra, this underlying concept, this thing that I keep coming back to is that law enforcement really is, law enforcement is in a very unique position, right? Law enforcement is both part of the community as well as part of the government. In fact, for a lot of people, it's the face of the government, one face of the government that they will often actually interact with. The chances of you interacting with other portions of the government, the Congress, the Senate, whatever, outside of the news, you're rarely going to do that. But law enforcement is a face of the government that you interact with. So as society degrades and as society falls apart, which is exactly what we're dealing with right now, you're going to see that this is going to affect law enforcement officers first and foremost. And it already is. It's also going to affect their ability to do their job. We've talked about it on here. Everybody knows it. It's what the thin blue line stands for. But law enforcement is the line between civility and anarchy. So there's already this situation where law enforcement is in the middle of things that are falling apart, right? Because they're that line that keeps the civility in a world that is intent on pushing the anarchy into it. However, being both the face of the community and the government, they are in many ways the last line of protection to the Constitution. In fact, they're sworn to uphold it. So as we see a lot of things going on right now, and you're seeing it on a national level, that's why we talk about news. That's why we talk about politics. That's why we talk about some of these constitutional issues. That's why we talk about America's founding. That's why we talk about original intent. Why do these things matter? Well, they matter because they affect law enforcement. Believe it or not, every one of those issues affect you if you're in law enforcement. And if you're not, then you need to understand what law enforcement's role is in this, because you want good officers. You want people who understand the Constitution. You want people who want to uphold America's values, what it was founded on. Another problem you're seeing, and we're all seeing it in the law enforcement community, is people disappearing. I want to mention an article here. It was ran in Fox News back on, if you bear with me just a second here, July 19th. And the headline says, Minnesota's City of Morris to disband police department. So when you read it, it starts out with one of these, there's been all these issues going on in the news, specifically Minnesota. And so they decided to disband the police department. And so you start getting one idea of what this article is about. However, as you read through it, you start realizing that it's a teeny tiny agency, first of all. So Morris has 5,200 residents, and they're budgeted for 8 full-time officers and an administrative specialist. And they've been around, this little police department has been around for more than 140 years. And what they're going to do is they're going to contract with the sheriff's office to take over. So that's not uncommon. In fact, we've all seen that happen in different places around the country. And sometimes it's funding issues and so forth. But there's 2 points that they make in this article that I want you to catch. First of all, they're supposed to have 8 full-time officers, and they had dwindled down to 2 officers and the chief. 2 officers, which includes the chief. So 1 officer and the chief is all they had out of the 8 that they're supposed to have. So again, a teeny tiny agency. But when you get down to the bottom of this article, and I'm quoting here, nationally, law enforcement agencies are only able to fill 93% of available positions, according to the nonprofit Police Executive Research Forum, which surveyed nearly 200 agencies last year. The profession's in the midst of a 25-year low of new officers entering the field. At the same time, officers are retiring and resigning at increased levels. What is this going to do? See, that's part of what the goal is to educate the public and to educate. We need good officers. We need people who are going to enter this profession and stay in this profession because they want to make a difference. I don't blame people who don't want to come to this profession right now. When you look at it from a national scale, if you're looking at what the legacy media is portraying it as, if you're listening to certain politicians, I could very well see why you don't want to enter this profession and why you don't want your kids to enter this profession. However, we need good officers. And when I say we, I'm referring to we as in the public sense. You and me who are, as I get older and as eventually I move away from this profession, I want to know that there's still good officers out there. I want to know that my family is still safe, that I'm still in a community where there's good officers who believe in the Constitution, who believe in our founding, who believe in protecting people, who believe in the Bill of Rights. My goodness, if you don't believe in the Bill of Rights and you want to see the Constitution eradicated, that is very scary if you're a law enforcement officer, because a lot of them apply directly to you and to how you interact with the public. So that's what I wanted to go over today. I wanted to talk about that, talk about the manpower issues. I know I was having a conversation not too long ago with a local academy, and in that conversation we were talking about one of the classes that they were going to have, and that essentially they had, I believe it was 1 or 2 applicants out of typically 30, maybe 50 that you would typically have for that specific class. That's not acceptable. And so, what do we do long term? What do we do as a country? What do we do as a society? And what do we do as a community? So, that's one of the topics that I want to discuss coming forward. I hope that this was beneficial to you. I appreciate you listening, and I hope that you got something out of it. And just know that there will be more content. You can find out everything you want to know about this and what there is to come at ontheblueline.com, ontheblueline.com. It's a brand new website. Everything has been reworked on there. So definitely give me your feedback. One thing I would love is to hear from you. You can find us on pretty much every social media. Definitely drop me a message. Let me know if you're enjoying the content, what you'd like to see. And the interview shows will be coming back. They're not going to be every week. I want to change up the format a little bit, and so they're going to be at different intervals, but more on that in the coming weeks. They probably won't release until the first part of September, so you're going to have about 4 weeks of these morning roll calls and some other things that I have in the works between now and then. So I appreciate everyone sticking with me. I hope that you are enjoying the content, and as always, if you need anything, reach out to us on theblueline.com. Everyone have a safe week.